Thank you for joining us on this momentous evening. We are broadcasting live from the moon. My name is Will VARLEY. This is Recess with Spinelli.
You're tuned in to Recess with Spinelli here on WSPN, Saratoga Springs, New York, Hoxton FM, London, England, the International Radio Festival, and the New York State Music Blog. And today we are here with London-born, but currently in Deal/Kent area of England, the folk artist Will VARLEY. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us today.
Now, I understand you've had one very busy year doing a tour in both the EU and the US with Mr. Frank Turner.
Yeah, it's been a pretty solid year. I think by the end of December, I'll have done something like 125 shows, which for me, I mean, that's quite a lot of gigs. It's kind of like works out roughly like, I think it's more than one every 3 days. But for someone like Frank, it's pretty much a year off. You know, he works so hard, he plays so much. But for me, it's definitely my busiest year, yeah.
Now, actually, before this, your touring experience, I believe, was to the extent of walking 150 or 500 miles in certain circumstances on a tour. I think I read something about.
I've done 2 walking tours in the UK, one which was 150 miles and another one which was 500 miles. I mean, I've toured in all kinds of different ways. I've toured in, on the trains, I've toured in cars, and now, thanks to Frank, I've toured in the luxurious tour buses, which is a whole different world. But yeah, the walking thing's cool. I've done it a couple of times. You get very sore legs.
So I'm kind of curious. I haven't actually heard of another artist doing a walking tour. Are you walking the whole way? Are you hitchhiking? How does this process work?
The way I did it, I kind of wanted to recreate the original sort of touring, the Commedia dell'arte of Italy, the original minstrels, where the kind of troubadour word kind of comes from. And they would just go from town to town on foot most of the time. If they were lucky, maybe in a sort of horse-drawn carriage or something like that. But usually it was on foot, and they just go from place to place and sort of tell their stories. And I just wanted to kind of experience that in this day and age and see whether that could work. So it was walking every step, no hitchhiking. It was we'd sort of walk maybe 20, 25 miles a day, and then we'd sit down for 5 minutes and then do the show. And then usually sleep at the venue above the bar or something, and that was how it worked. It was a great time. It was kind of quite a romantic thing like beforehand and afterwards. There was a lot of romance. During it was just a lot of sweat and tears. But
25 miles a day. You weren't too tired to do the performance?
Yeah, we were, but we did it anyway.
So what were some of the reactions from the folks at the venue or the fans at the venue when you told them that you were literally walking a whole tour?
Yeah, I mean, when you walk into a town on foot, people are very generous to you, like immediately. If you roll in a van, you're like every other band, you know. As soon as you turn up there, blisters and sweat, and people would just offer us their houses and like drinks and food, and so we were really well looked after, and we were raising a little bit of money as well for charity, so. People got behind that, and it was a great time.
So was everything completely spontaneous in that way, like playing at the venues and meeting everybody?
The first time it was. The first one, we basically just walked into towns and found gigs as we went. The second time I organised the shows beforehand and the accommodation, so I got in touch with pubs and bars and said we're going to be in this town at this time, and that was a lot easier than just kind of hoping. The first time we had tents on our backs, so we did a lot of wild camping as well as the guitars, and that kind of was a bit of a killer. So the second time around I didn't want to take a tent because you got enough stuff to carry as is.
From a craft perspective, musically, does that offer anything for inspiration maybe, or just thinking of new things, looking at things from a different angle when you're doing a walking tour as opposed to what you're doing today, which is on a bus? Yeah,
absolutely. There's something about patience that you learn when you walk. You kind of step out. It took us about a month. The first day you step out and you know you're going to get there at some point, but you can't rush it. There's no way you can speed it up. You can walk a little bit faster, but it doesn't make much difference. So you kind of learn this patience, this sense of just like, we're going to get there at some point. It doesn't really matter, whether I want to or not, or whether I feel good or bad, or We're just going to keep on walking, and we're going to get there. And I think that in itself has been a really powerful lesson for me to learn. I think a lot of modern touring is based around getting rid of that aspect, making things as easy as possible. You know, the way this tour works is you fall asleep on the bus after the show and you wake up and you're at the next venue. So it literally removes that whole sense of movement, of travelling. You go to sleep and you wake up and the travelling's been done without you, in a way. So yeah, I think that's definitely seeped into my songwriting a little bit somehow. I couldn't tell you exactly how, but...
Now, would you consider doing a walking tour again in the future, or have you got that experience out of the way?
I'd love to do it again. I'd love to do it in the US. I'm kind of looking at ways of making it work, possibly on the West Coast to start off with. The weather will be a little bit more favourable for the times that I can do it. Although it's been gorgeous weather around here while we've been around. Yeah, watch this space. I have to forget how bad it was the first time before I do it again. Yep. So I've got a few more months, I think, until I'm fully ready. Yeah.
If you know where you are when you wake up, something's wrong.
You're a label mate with Mr. Frank Turner, right, over at Extra Mile? Is that how you guys met and worked out a tour?
Yeah, so Frank and I met in a bar in Camden Town. I was doing a show. Beans on Toast invited me to go and play. Frank was in the crowd, and we got kind of chatting afterwards, had a couple of beers, and he invited me to come and do some gigs with him. And it was, you know, the thing is, when you do this for a living, as I did for a long time, and it really was very, very like touch and go. You know, there was always a sense of that this may be the last week or two that I was able to carry on doing it, where it became viable. And when I met Frank, he kind of he came at just the right time. You know, it was at a time when I was kind of questioning whether I could carry on doing this for my living, and whether I needed to sort of do something else. And Frank kind of appeared like a guardian angel out of the darkness, and yeah, and since over the last 2 years has kind of invited me on numerous tours, and been very generous with his time and with his contacts and the whole Extra Mile thing. So yeah, it's been great to meet him.
So what was maybe your plan B if things maybe did not change during that period of time?
I never had a plan B. I think plan Bs are very dangerous things. I always just... I guess maybe I was getting to a point where I was going to try and start constructing a plan B. I don't know, what would I have done? Maybe I'd have become a professional walker.
So do you think constructing a plan B can be a little bit dangerous in the way, because then maybe you start falling back on that plan B a little too soon?
Yeah, absolutely. I never went to university. I left school when I was 18, and I guess that would be college here. So I never went to college. And I have had various jobs over my life, but nothing really. I've never. My parents always kind of wanted me to get a trade, something that I could kind of fall back on, as you say. But yeah, I think if you're going to do it, I'm one of the laziest people you're ever going to meet, And if I have an option not to do something that's hard, then I'll take the option not to do it.
Unless it's walking 500 miles.
Yeah, but I didn't have by the time I got there, I didn't have much of an option to stop. We added the kind of for the guy that I did it with, Nick Marks. He added the kind of charity element to things, and a huge part of the reason we did it for charity, or that I kind of agreed to doing it for charity, was because it meant that I couldn't stop. Whereas without that element, I think there's a good chance I'd have just gone home one night.
Now, when did all this start turning into a full-time career, if you will?
Well, I've been doing this for my living for about 4 or 5 years. When I started, it was more like I'd be going out to open mics, acoustic nights. I've been doing that for 15 years, but for a living about 5 years ago. And the thing is, I'd sort of maybe spend £30 on a train ticket and try and sell 4 or 5 CDs, which meant I got to go home with £10 or £20 for the night. I do that like 4 or 5 nights a week and just about make the rent every week. And that's literally how it begun to be my living. And then you carry on doing that for months and months, and eventually someone says, hey, come and play my club and I'll give you £50, and you're like, wow, £50, that's a lot for a night's work, you know. And it just kind of gone on from there. I feel like I've been on the same journey that I was when I was 13. I don't feel like I've at any point sort of suddenly everything's changed, or, you know, it just feels like kind of the same kind of vibe.
Now, when you signed on to Extra Mile, though, with Frank Turner, was there a potential conflict there? Because weren't you also the co-founder of the Smugglers label as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a conflict. I am still very much involved in Smugglers Records, and you know, they're an incredible organisation, and I think it got to a point where I just organically needed some help, you know, beyond what I could kind of get from me and my friends, and Extra Mile stepped in again just at the right time, and kind of offered that outside help, really.
Now, in doing some basic research, actually, between both yourself and Mr. Turner, it definitely seems like you both actually have a very DIY attitude. So what would you say are some of the things that you just have to constantly remind yourself to keep doing, or just keep getting done, to keep on the road, to stay keeping this as your career, if you will?
You have to keep writing new songs. I think that's probably the most important thing. You have to keep on putting new songs in the set, and challenging yourself, and always trying to do something a little bit differently to what you've done before. I think otherwise you start to go backwards, and then you start to question why you're doing what you're doing. But I think as long as you're challenging yourself, then you can carry on going forever and ever.
We don't believe you anymore.
Lyrically, your songs, a lot of them, one that springs to mind is We Don't Believe You, definitely seem to focus a little bit more on the political side of things, that and The Man Who Fell to Earth. Now, do you ever find at all that perhaps writing a little bit more on the political side, or maybe the politically conscious side, can alienate some listeners at time, or do you think it actually brings in more people?
I never think that I write political songs. I don't think they're... You know, there's a misconception that if you're writing songs which involve kind of, you know, things that are happening in the world, that you have an agenda or some kind of political predetermined agenda, which I genuinely don't. I don't claim at any point to sort of have, you know, any real massive political understanding. I just respond to the world in the way that I do it. You know, when I was a kid, I used to write songs about, you know, dogs and cats and stuff, and, you know, now I write songs about people who want to build walls between countries, and there's no, do you know what I mean? There's no, to me, again, there's no difference. I'm just kind of doing the same stuff that I was doing before. I write songs for very selfish reasons. I see something and I respond to it, and so you can read politics into my songs if you want to, but it's just like, the love songs to me are the same as the songs that people will say are kind of political, you know? You know, you see a glass on a table and it's reflecting the light in a certain way, and you try and, you know, kind of respond to it somehow, whether that's about chronicling how it looks or creating something else. It's just kind of the nature of making things. I think if you start out with an agenda and you start saying, you know, this is a political song, and I believe this, and you should believe this, and people who believe that are wrong. Well, I just don't know enough about it, really, to be able to do that kind of thing. As Billy Bragg says, I don't want to change the world, you know?
So before we sign off for the evening, is there anything else that you would like to tell the listeners that you think is important to know about yourself, tour, work, anything that comes to mind?
Never let Frank Turner choose your Halloween costumes.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thanks for joining us at this show. Should be a good night.
You've been listening to Recess with Spinelli here on WSPN, Saratoga Springs, New York, Hoxton FM, London, England, the International Radio Festival, and the New York State Music Blog. And we've been speaking with Mr. Will Varley. His new album, Kingsdown Sundown, is out and available now.
Still dancing in that square.